Hello,
You're
good
on.
afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. It's Don Anderson here with Captive Audience. Sunny is going to be unable to make it tonight because she's working a booth at a fair. Kevin's going to be with us here for a little bit, but he's got to take off too. But basically, welcome to Wonderful Wednesday. I hope you all are doing well, and I apologize for the delay. Forgive me for my, it's all due to my lack of techno savvy, right? So we're working on that.
Actually, me being delayed. That,
Yeah.
that that's make sure I want some credit for being delayed here. So,
Well, thank you, Kevin, for letting me off the hook a little bit. All right.
well, and so Don's going to drive tonight. I just joined to say a quick hello and make sure everything is working like it should be. And so Don, the show is all yours. You're going to fly solo tonight, and it's good to be on here with you for a few minutes once again.
All right. Hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate you getting me up and running. So
You bet.
basically, yeah. So everyone, I thought, you know how much I love history. And one of the things I like to do is start off with a brief background, a little bit of history here. And I think an interesting place to start would be we all saw what happened with the Paris Olympics
Oh
and
yeah.
basically the desecration of the Lord's Supper, right? So unbelievable what they did. And there's no question about it. It was definitely a desecration. So what it reminded me of was to go back a little bit of a walk in history. And since this event happened in France, it made me think about the French Revolution. And then you ask yourself that question, what was the difference between the American Revolution and the French Revolution? And I remember getting curious about this when I was in high school. So I went back and dug up some old papers that I'd written way back then, because I think you'd find this really interesting. So the American Revolution was essentially led by a group of men who understood that since man is a fallen creature, and these were all religious people, for the most part Christians, since man is a fallen creature, it'd be very unwise to trust man. So they wanted to reduce the concentration of power so there wasn't too much power concentrated in just one single entity or spot. So, for that reason, they developed a government where power was dispersed widely across a lot of different places. So, hence, we have 50 states. We have, powers dispersed across those 50 states. We have a judicial branch, a legislative branch, and an executive branch. So, again, three different places for power to be dispersed, all because they had a mistrust of the nature of man. Now, how does that compare to the French Revolution? So the French Revolution was led by a group of atheists. So specifically driven by folks like philosophers like Rousseau, Locke, Hobbes. This was a very man-centered religion. In fact, it's the religion of science, if you will. The cult of reason is what they called it. So those are the two basic revolutions. Both happened at roughly the same time. American Revolution occurred between 1776 and roughly 1787. French Revolution occurred roughly between 1789 and 1799. So these two revolutions had dramatically different outcomes. The result of the American Revolution you're very familiar with, a phenomenal republic that grew from a very small country in 1789 to by 1900 was the world hegemon. So a little over 100 years, the world's hegemon from an economic perspective. Unbelievable wealth, unbelievable success. The French Revolution, on the other hand, got a tremendously different outcome for the French. So I thought I'd run you through just a little bit of what that got. So what came out of the French Revolution? Basically, the invention of the guillotine is one of the things that came out of it because they guillotined roughly 17,000 people during this press for reason. What were some of the other things that occurred during that revolution? Were the destruction of statues, the takeover of the church, the execution of over 200 priests. I think 3 bishops were also executed in that. Um, the they even eliminated Sunday as a holiday just to make sure they took religiosity out of it. Because remember, this is the age of reason. This is the belief in man. So the belief that man could fix his own problems basically led to a revolution that resulted in a disaster where the guillotine wound up working overtime. So so you ask yourself, what are the parallels of that compared to what we see in our own society, in our own culture? And I think it's very interesting if you take a look at that. So current media, what do we see? We see the tearing down of statues in the United States. We see the leftist agenda doing things like changing even the calendar, similar to the changes in the Gregorian calendar, which they did back then. We have the elimination of AD and BC. Now we use BCE and before Common Era and CE, Common Era, in an effort to eliminate any religiosity associated with the dating, even though we all know that the dates center around the death of Jesus. Elimination of religious symbols from public places, and the effort to make it uncomfortable to speak about religion publicly. We see this all across the board: the religion of the Bible from the public school, and then the constant focus on the separation of church and state, and being interpreted to mean that you can't speak from a religious perspective. So I thought that was just a very interesting thing to observe, given what we just watched with the Olympics and that direct assault on religiosity. I used to hear people say things like this was a spiritual war, and kind of had my doubts about it. But if that wasn't a very compelling statement, that it is without a doubt at bottom a war on religion, a war on Western civilization, which is founded on Judeo-Christianity, then I'm not sure what was. So I thought you'd all find that, really interesting. One other thing that's going on right now, a lot of people are looking just to our national scene here in the United States, but not looking at what's going on overseas. And have you all been able to check out what's happening in Great Britain, for example, with all of the riots that are happening across that country? It's incredible the instability that's happening there, and it's due almost entirely to massive illegal immigration, or massive, in this case, legal immigration, because they're not enforcing their immigration laws. So as a result, they're getting tons of people from all over the world, primarily from cultures that don't share the same value systems as is shared by those of Great Britain. So there's no time for these people to be assimilated, no time for them to learn the language. They often wind up in enclaves where they only speak the same language from their place of origination. So there's no opportunity for them to assimilate. They view themselves as not citizens of Great Britain, but basically people looking to get a better opportunity economically, but not looking to be a part of the larger fabric of the country. And as a result, we see all kinds of things happening because of that. So we see crime through the roof. We see women being mistreated. We see rape on a wide scale. And we have a ruling elite that refuses to do anything about it. Now, this is one of those things that's so obvious to me that if you were to allow a tremendous influx of people from another country without any time for them to assimilate, particularly from another culture, you're going to wind up with problems. And the best way to resolve those problems is A, make your immigration legal, B, slow it down so that the country can absorb them. But if your objective is to basically destabilize your country, I can't think of a better way to do it than that. And this is one of those things where a lot of people think that that if we just explain it better to people, then they'll understand the position on why a large influx of illegal immigrants is going to be bad for the country. And that might be true if you're just talking to your neighbor. But this is something that's so obvious that I think those at the top of the food chain, the folks who are placing us in this position, in other words, the elites who control the media, control the government, they know very well what they're doing. I just don't think they're that dumb. I think that they have a different agenda, and that's the destabilization of the United States so that they can put in place a form of government that is essentially Marxist or communist in nature. I mean, nothing else makes sense. I'm just following the evidence. The other thing that we'd be remiss if we didn't speak to a little bit was about the selection of Walz on the Democrat side to be the VP for Kamala Harris. And this is another one of these baffling things if you take a look at it, because normally when someone selects a vice president pick in the past, it's usually to get votes from a state that you're not getting those votes. Number one, to maybe tack back towards the middle. If you're on the conservative side, you tack back towards the middle to the left. If you're on the left side, you tack back towards the right. But this is one of those things that's really baffling because that's not what they've done at all. She's in fact picked someone or selected someone whose far more radical than she is. And the record really speaks for itself. Just to give you kind of a quick rundown in terms of just how radical this selection is. Uh, this governor has overseen, and this is the governor of Minnesota, has overseen pro-gender mutilation laws, tampons in boys' bathrooms, bans on guns, of course, promoting DEI, unlimited abortion right up to the time of birth, the removal of police from neighborhoods that need them. During the riots, you remember the police station in Minneapolis that was allowed to be overrun and then burned to the ground. All of this occurred under this person's watch. So, and this is in a state where they're probably going to win anyway. So, why would you select someone who's even more radical than you are? Now, this is pure speculation on my part, but maybe it's one of those things where it's an effort to provide to make her impeachment proof, if you will. In other words, if you get rid of her, the person that follows is someone even more radical than her. So I don't know. That's pure speculation. Don't know the answer. But I don't see how that helps her. Maybe to shore up her base and get her base excited. It will certainly do that. But you can't just win on your base alone. And that's true on the Republican side or the conservative side as well. So basically what she's done is she's provided the Trump folks with a whole lot of ammunition for the independents, which is basically a group that you have to win. The other question you have to ask yourself is, why not select someone like the governor of Pennsylvania? I believe his name is Shapiro. There's a person who's in a state that's in play. It's a swing state. You could have gone with the governor of Arizona. I believe he's an astronaut. I can't think of his name right now, but there's a state that's also in play. Both of those folks are more moderate. Why not choose one of them? I suspect in the case of Pennsylvania, you got to pander to that Palestinian group that you've got, and so you can't have those students losing their mind. So that's probably the reason that they stayed away from him. Why they stayed away from Governor of Arizona, I don't know, but certainly very interesting things to think about. So thought that'd be a good topic to just touch with you all on. The other was the let's see if we're getting any so just now pull up my chats. Forgive me for my lack of technology here. So just starting to look at this. So thanks a lot, Lori and Nicholas, for giving me a little a little feedback on that on the commentary. I really appreciate it. And then how about this attack on Vance, which is another thing that's absolutely fascinating. Vance, they're attacking him for being weird. Now, talk about the pot calling the kettle black. I mean, Kamala Harris is calling Vance weird. We're talking about a party that's totally in support of gays twerking in parades in front of kids, in porn in the kids' classrooms. What do you call it? Mutilation of kids without parents being able to be engaged in a conversation about it. It's unbelievable how far radical they are. And once again, it goes back to that old adage, the very things that they accuse the other side of, then that's what they're definitely doing themselves. You can pretty much count on that. And Pat, you're absolutely right. Democrats, they've always been weird. In fact, the motto in Portland, for those who are familiar, it used to be "Keep Portland Weird." I think Austin has adopted the same motto. And weird, they definitely are. Although a lot of the residents are beginning to regret that. So there's a little good news there. One other thing, too, is very interesting to see what's happening with the stock markets of late. Now, I didn't look at it this morning, but I understand it's down quite a bit. And what the national press, thinking about things like the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, are basically saying is due to bad jobs reviews or bad employment numbers. But that doesn't really make sense. What makes much better sense is the markets are responding to the threat of war. Those are the kinds of things that drive markets to make changes. So when the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred, the market had a radical response to that, and not in a good direction. When the Six-Day War with Israel occurred back in 69, the market had a dramatic response to that. When the Gulf War crisis occurred, the market responded dramatically to that. So markets don't like instability. And The thought of potentially going to war is the kinds of things that cause instability. And the one thing that we just saw was the Israelis just assassinated what I think it was like three different heads of Palestinian military organizations or part of their political structure. The most recent one, I think, on Iranian soil to boot. So clearly, I think that's what's got the markets upset. So unless you are in defense contracts, we all know the implications of that. Probably not a good place to be investing right now. So, but why I want the national media to talk about that? Because it's a reflection of just how poorly this administration has managed foreign policy. I mean, none of these kinds of things were happening, when during the Trump administration. So, yet one more thing. I don't know how many of you all have followed or heard about this Google case, and I should have found the link and sent this to you. But Google loses a court case, and this is absolutely huge because basically what they're being sued for is maintaining a monopoly in that space. And it's pretty obvious that's what they've been doing in order to stay in power over everything. And I'm not necessarily I like the idea of of free trade, free markets, but there's some things where clearly what they're doing is radically unfair. And if there ever was an opportunity where it made sense to take another look at that, is certainly in the case of Google. So this is yet another one of those huge cases. It makes me think about the Chevron case that occurred just a couple of weeks ago. It's as big as Roe v. Wade. It's as big as a Chevron case. If this continues to go the right direction, as Google is forced to dismantle, that would be huge. And I don't know if any of you have had adverse experiences with Google. It's amazing how much they tinker with stuff. And I'll give you an example. I was doing a little research on slavery because all you hear when you look at slavery, you would think slavery only occurred in the United States, and it only occurred, over the last 400 years. When the reality is, we know slavery has been around probably since the time there were more than 10 people around on the planet at the same time. It certainly goes back to the book of Exodus. We know for sure that that's what the Egyptians were doing when they were enslaving the Jews. It's gone on in every country, on every continent, with every ethnicity for all of time. But if you click on Google and do a search on slavery, what you will get is about 95% of the slave trade only focused on that portion that occurs in North America. And so I went on Google just to do that search, and I was utterly shocked by how many pages I had to go through before I found out about any slavery anywhere else. And that's on purpose, because the objective is to make the United States to be the bad guy, the worst country in history, even though the United States, along with Great Britain, were the only countries in history to send its ships at sea in order to stop slavery. I think I saw somewhere where Britain sank over 1,000 slave ships just by itself in order to put an end to it. And it was Christians that did that. And it was Christianity that caused an end to slavery in the United States. The Civil War was not, everyone likes to portray it, or at least the left loves to portray it, as a North versus the South, when reality was, it was the free North versus the slave South. It was the Republican North versus the Confederate South. You never hear it spoken in those terms. I would just love it if one candidate would come along with a highly visible podium to say it. The Republican National Convention would have been a great place to say it, and call that history out, because very few people are aware of that. It's been the Democrat Party that's been pro-slavery since the beginning. It was the Democrat Party that put in force, that invented the KKK in order to prevent blacks from voting. It was a Democrat Party with a Democrat governor who stood in the schoolhouse steps in order to prevent black people from voting. It was the Democrat Party that developed concentration camps in order to house the Japanese during World War II. It was a Democrat Party that did all of this stuff, and nobody calls them out. But of course, the folks in this audience now armed with that knowledge, go forth and speak. Whew, I gotta stop and take my breath. So I thought those were all, very interesting. So, yeah, I see, Nicholas, your comment about Vance being weird in the party of groomers, and that is precisely what they are. And one of the things I'm really looking forward to is when there's actually a debate around these things. Because one of the things that you also see is you'll notice how suddenly Kamala is being hidden in the basement. And it's very interesting to take an assessment and realize that strategy really worked well for them with Biden. From the time he was elected until the time they had that debate, Biden was never allowed out in public, or very rarely allowed in public. And he was never allowed in public unless he had a teleprompter, unless the time was very limited, unless they were super friendly questioners. And that strategy really worked well for them. Had it not been for the fact that his poll numbers were dropping so precipitously, he probably would still be in office. But the fact of the matter was, his poll numbers dropped so badly that they had to get him out of there. They couldn't talk him out of it. I don't know who or why they made the decision to put him in front of a camera. I think that's just hubris. They really thought they could continue to play, if you will, quote unquote, the American public. And once the American public got to see for themselves, forget about policy, forget about positions, just see that this person's incapable mentally of being in power. Polls dropped amazingly from there and forced them to make a decision. And now we have Kamala. And what I would say about her is she's not suffering from senility, although I'm not sure the difference in terms of her ability or willingness to answer questions. There's just nothing there. And I think they realize that. So they're putting in place the same strategy they put in place to manage Biden, and that's to keep her away from cameras, keep her away from debate situations, keep her away from places where she can speak from a teleprompter or in very small audiences. And that's worked really well for them so far. And our polling numbers have come up because the national press is basically selling that for her. So until we get into a debate scenario, I'm pretty sure that's the strategy they're going to continue to play. So the debate might be the only place we actually get to see her have to operate without a teleprompter. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens as a result of that. And yeah, Biden, you're right. They're still hiding him. So. And again, I think one of those things too here is I'm not sure how much, faith I would put in polls, because historically they tend to be really biased by who's doing the polling. Number one, and number two, it's in the best interests of the Democratic Party to make themselves look as good as absolutely possible. I'm still of the belief that the vast majority of Americans don't need any data. They can simply go to the store and they can see what the prices are they're paying for. They can go to buy a home and see that interest rates are like absolutely out of control. They can go to the gas station and see the prices they're paying are twice as much as they paid just 4 years ago. They can turn on the TV and see all these wars we're engaged in. None of that was going on before. And obviously the crime is completely out of control. Every time you turn around, there's another illegal immigrant who's committed some major crime or killed or raped someone. So simply keeping that information in front of people will be what needs to happen going into November. And I remain pretty confident that the majority of Americans are going to see that and not opt for 4 more years of this stuff. So, gosh, I thought, and here was something that was a little kind of off the beaten path in terms of news. And where did I see this? A political journalist cited the dangerous and destabilizing effect of plummeting birth control rates. Now, this we've seen around the world. I'm sure by now this audience at least is familiar with the fact that China is suffering a major drop off in terms of its birth control, so much so that I think sometime in the next couple of years, India is set to pass them as being the most populous country on earth. People just aren't having babies. And that's largely a result of the policy they put into place. Talk about draconian. That one-child policy they put in place back in the 80s and 90s, now that's come back to bite them in a big way. And not even speaking to the morality of such a decision, but speaking to the reality of how can you maintain and grow an economy when you have fewer and fewer working people supporting an aging population. And that ratio is getting down to basically, when it gets down to 1 to 2, that's going to be hard to support. And that's what's happening in China. But as a result of the last, 4 years or so, given the whole COVID scare and all of these other things that are going on, the increases in prices, the difficulty in buying the first home, difficulty in finding the first job, the huge amount of debt that young people are forced to carry if they've gone on and paid to college. All of that causes people to delay or avoid getting married or having kids. And we see that being played out in the birth rate. So now the birth rate in the United States, according to this article, Political, is down to 1.6, I think I saw here. 2.1 is what you need for replacement. We're down to 1.6. That's just over the course of the last year. That's not good. Italy and Japan are down like 1.2, and the populations are aging at a hugely rapid rate. So much so, there comes a point where, those countries can't survive any longer. And I'm going to guess that if you all looked around in your neighborhoods, just walking around, going to the store, going to public places, you'll start to notice you see fewer and fewer babies. So I know I see it in my world. I'm kind of more aware of it. Whenever I go to the store, I start looking around, and you see less and less of that. And all of this, I think, is a part of this destabilization effort at the top of the food chain to attack the family. So attack the family, attack the faith. That's the basic building blocks for society. How you build a functional society starts with the family, because that's where you build civilization, if you will. That's how you build that person to be someone who cares more about others. That's where you build virtue. And if people don't have virtue, if they're all savages, we know what happens. And that seems to be the strategy of the left, because you can tear down a society, then you can run it. And I can't. It's brilliant. It's evil brilliance, as near as I can tell. Then how about, I thought this other thing was pretty interesting as well. This the House Republicans responded to this 9/11 plea deal reversal. I'm not sure how many of you heard of that. It's a little old. I think it was a couple of days ago, but there was the 9/11 mastermind Khalid Muhammad was on pace, on a plan to be on the death penalty, basically, and they did this prisoner exchange, or they proposed it, and he was going to no longer have the death penalty. Well, I think there was such a cry out from the populace that the left had to reverse it. So it wasn't because it was immoral to do this. They did it because they're looking to get votes, which is pretty much the driving force around everything that they do. So it's just one more insight into the radical left and how they behave. And I saw another article here too that I thought you all might find interesting. This is with regard to Kamala Harris and her ability to manage people. More and more information has come out around those who worked for her have a terrible time working for her. And the ability to manage and lead people is, well, essential to any managerial position where someone reports to you. It certainly would be central to a position such as president of the United States, or even vice president. But as vice president, she's had like horrendous turnover. People pretty much says she mistreats her staff and her interns horribly. And as a result, nobody wants to work for her, or they work there for a short period of time and they leave there quickly. And now this person's running for the biggest office in the land. Certainly that's something that ought to be looked at more closely, is can she manage? Can she lead? So that is something I think will increasingly come under scrutiny moving forward, and it really should. Then a couple of things, bringing it more close to home, I found a couple of articles about Portland that I thought you all would find interesting, because it's relatively close to home. So we go from the national and go to the local. And, well, there's good news and bad news. The bad news is, yes, it's bad. So Portland was ranked as one of the fastest shrinking cities in the United States, the sixth fastest shrinking city in the U.S., according to one report. The reason being housing prices, crime, traffic. Those seem to be the three biggest drivers. Then I saw this article about a couple from Portland that visited, and basically they said they'll never come back. Short version, they went to downtown Portland, and their car got broken into and their goods stolen. They got the car fixed and repaired, went to another location in Portland. It got broken and stolen again. So there's your Portland experience. And I used to think these kinds of things are maybe they're exaggerated, but when these things happen close to home, I'll give you just a couple of personal examples. Neighbor across the street, this is about 2 or 3 years ago. They were celebrating their wedding anniversary, went down to the Pearl District, and their car, somebody was just going along while they were in a restaurant and with a hammer just bashing out the windows of cars. Not looking to steal anything, mind you, just random bashing the windows out of cars, right? So that was their experience. My daughter was in downtown Portland. Guy rammed the back of her car. She was driving for a friend who had so much to drink. So fortunately, it wasn't her car. Guy rammed him off the road, and the hit and run just kept right on going. Fortunately, they weren't injured. They weren't injured. My own experience going there, I've seen cars racing like all the time. You're on the freeway and they go by you at like 90, 100 miles an hour. Two cars split and go around you. And you can drive all over Portland and never see police, by the way. It's just amazing what they've done that in terms of reducing the number of police, reducing the morale of the police by the way that they treat them. And as a result, the increase in crime because you have a DA who refuses to enforce the law. So that combination has, yes, indeed, Bobby, they are definitely kept Portland really, really weird. Really, really weird. Now, here's the positive associated with that, though. I saw some polling data about a week or so ago that showed, now this is Oregon in general, but of course, Oregon's hugely reflective of what happens in Portland. Well, in terms of Trump's running for office, Oregon actually has gone from deep blue to light blue, meaning it's within 5%. That's incredible when you think about what the politics of Oregon are like. For Oregon to actually get to a point where it's less than, where Trump's only 5% behind Harris, that's absolutely amazing. Now, there's not enough electoral votes to make it worthwhile for Trump to come to Oregon and campaign, although I would love to see what would happen if he did. But what that goes to show you is if logic doesn't work, then the pain from leftist policies will eventually force you to make changes. And we saw that with the election of a district attorney who is who's more conservative and is going to actually enforce law. We see that in the willingness of the state to review, looking at reversing these crazy laws like the legalization of drugs, because they're being forced to do so. So there's still hope. Keep hope alive. For those of you old enough to remember Jesse Jackson's famous chant from 40 years ago, I'm giving away my age now for sure. Keep hope alive. So there you go with the Portland front. And I've seen a number of articles too talking about blue cities that are once again making crime illegal again. How about that? So we see these changes happening in places like San Francisco, where they've got a new DA who's looking at reversing those laws. So we're making incremental progress. It's moving in the right direction, right? And then there's one last thing I thought I'd touch on, just to see if any of you all had heard about this. And this was about the DEI going on with, of all companies, Harley Davidson. Have any of you all heard this or seen the news on this? Apparently, their organization is led by a management team that's pushing DEI beyond belief. Sort of in this, not quite as flagrantly as maybe a Bud Light, but they're pushing that. And the public needs to know that so they can punish Harley Davidson same way that they punish Budweiser. You have choices. You don't have to buy Harley Davidson. And it's a shame because if you think of what could be a more patriotic, label, more American label than Harley Davidson. Of course, you would have said the same thing about Budweiser as well. All of us grew up in the era of the Harley guy, the macho guy, the American-made brand, the muscular Harley Davidson. Same way with the big horses from Budweiser. I can still hear that song around Christmas and see the Clydesdales marching along. Both of those brands have been taken over by the left. And the only way we're going to win our country back is inch by inch paying attention to these sorts of things. And it's not that difficult. Nobody's asking us to go out there and stand on a police line or go out there and get clubbed in the head or beheaded like they are in a lot of countries in order to get their freedom. Here, for the time being, all we got to do is speak up. We got to vote. We got to go to the school board meetings. We got to choose not to buy from outfits that are against your basic fundamental core beliefs. So you think about NBA, NFL, Disney, Target, Bud, Harley Davidson. Create a list of organizations that you're not going to buy from and make the easy choice not to buy for them. There's a lot more of us than there are of them. Makes you think of that children's cartoon, right? I think it was ants. There's a whole bunch of ants and only a few grasshoppers, but the ants got to unite, otherwise they're not going to win. So, sports fans, I can't believe it. It's almost 7 o'clock. I think this concludes my briefing, as we used to say in the Air Force. Hey, thank you all so much for coming on board and putting up with me flying solo without the vivacious Sunny. I'm counting on you all to give her a positive report in my absence. And I always enjoy the company of you all, and I enjoy the commentary as well. You all take care. Let freedom ring. Amen. Thank you, Bobby. Hallelujah. And make America great again.